All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a highly specific, honestly pretty complex political narrative that recently surfaced in a video from a channel called Promethean Updates. Now, regardless of where you personally sit on the political spectrum, understanding exactly how these intricate political narratives are constructed is absolutely fascinating. Our goal here isn't to validate or debunk these claims, but to neutrally map out how this source weaves totally disparate events into a single grand theory of global power. We're literally looking at the architecture of an argument.
So here is our roadmap for today. The core argument, lever 1, the ballot, the Michigan case study, lever 2, the builder, and finally, synthesizing the theory. All right, section 1, the core argument. Okay, so the source's overarching claim here is that an entrenched imperial elite relies on two totally distinct levers to maintain global control over sovereign nations. Over on the left, we've got lever 1, rig the ballot, which represents systemic electoral corruption. And on the right, lever 2, remove the builder, representing targeted political violence. The video's central thesis is that on one specific Thursday, three major political figures, Donald Trump, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, actually coordinated their public addresses from different podiums to simultaneously expose both of these levers to the public. Moving on to Section 2, Lever 1, the ballot. The source really zeroes in on a prime-time address where the president announced the declassification of intelligence regarding massive election vulnerabilities. According to their narrative, this included an alleged Chinese hack of 220 million voter files. Now, 220 million is a massive number, right? But the video argues the hack itself wasn't even the main point of the speech. The real bombshell was the exposure of a cover-up. The commentator highlights a specific claim that an FBI official purportedly boasted about running a quote-unquote shadow government, designed specifically to keep these intelligence findings buried away from the president and the American public. To back up this claim of a cover-up, the source maps out how different institutions supposedly reacted in real time, and they paint a stark picture of a coordinated effort. On the political front, they point to Senator Mark Warner, who allegedly dismissed the declassified intelligence as just no new info. In the media, they claim major networks like ABC and NBC deliberately chose not to air the primetime address at all. Instead, they broadcast a game show and, no joke, a Tom Hanks documentary about alligators in a swamp. And institutionally, they reiterate the claim that the FBI and intelligence community systematically buried the data. The source frames this not just as media bias, but as a deliberate, coordinated tactic to keep the public entirely in the dark. Which brings us to Section 3, the Michigan case study. So the crucial point the video is making here isn't really about relitigating the 2020 election outcome. It's about exposing a very specific step-by-step methodology of alleged fraud. Picture this: fall of 2020. The city clerk in Muskegon, Michigan, who usually processes maybe 250 registrations, suddenly gets hit with over 8,000. These were reportedly delivered by GBI Strategies, a group contracted by major Democratic entities. The clerk allegedly notices identical handwriting across multiple forms and flags it. This leads to a police raid on GBI's offices, where investigators seize prepaid gift cards and company records. But according to the source, once the local police handed the investigation over to the FBI, it was intentionally buried. Now, the video places massive emphasis on this number 10. During that raid on the GBI Strategies office, police allegedly seized 10 specific weapons. We are talking 5 semi-automatic rifles equipped with suppressors and 5 customized pistols. The commentator literally refers to this as artillery and asks the super pointed question: why on earth was the presence of these heavily modified weapons at a voter registration organization's office never publicly explained or investigated further? For the source, this is the ultimate smoking gun of a covered-up operation. All right, let's pivot to Section 4, Level 2, the builder. So what happens if that first lever, corrupting the ballot, fails? Well, the narrative connects the president's speech to a State Department meeting happening on the exact same day, focused on the resurgence of left-wing terrorism. Here the source highlights a shocking claim made by Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. He stated he was the target of an assassination attempt by an adult left-wing activist in February 2024. And get this, it was merely 2 hours after taking office. 2 hours! The commentator frames this not as an isolated incident, but as the direct activation of Lever 2, forcibly removing the people who challenge the elite's policies. And this brilliantly illustrates the broader historical pattern the source tries to establish. Drawing on a speech given by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the video maps out decades of high-profile assassinations by left-wing terror groups like the Red Brigades in Italy and the Red Army faction in Germany. This includes Aldo Moro in 1978, Alfred Herrhausen in 1989, and Detlev Rohwedder in 1991. The video argues that these weren't just random acts of chaos, but precise strategic eliminations. Let's look at how they build this into their overarching theory. The narrative explicitly defines these assassinated figures not just as politicians, but as builders. According to this framework, a builder is someone actively striving for national sovereignty and self-governance. By creating strong, independent domestic economies, these individuals directly threaten what the source calls the global imperial business model. The source insists this is a meticulously targeted pattern. Take Aldo Moro, killed just as he was successfully building a stable, self-governing Italy. Alfred Herrhausen, the chairman of Deutsche Bank, assassinated by a highly sophisticated roadside bomb while planning a national reconstruction bank to rebuild Poland's industry and offering third-world debt relief. Detlev Rohwedder was murdered while attempting to save and restructure East German factories. The source claims that after his death, those factories were asset stripped by financial parasites, costing 4 million jobs. 4 million! The video even points to Peru's Sendero Luminoso, which explicitly targeted engineers and agronomists. The core takeaway here: the empire doesn't just kill politicians, it explicitly goes after the people with the technical capacity to actually build independent nations.
Finally, Section 5, synthesizing the theory.
Bringing it all together, the commentator concludes that the current U.S. administration is actively fighting a centuries-old, irregular war. By coordinating these messages on a single day, the source claims the administration masterfully exposed the establishment's playbook. On the left side, you have the president exposing Lever 1, the methods and cover-ups used to rig the ballot. On the right side, the secretaries of State and Treasury exposed Lever 2, the historical and ongoing use of political violence to remove sovereign builders. For the source, these aren't just isolated news stories. They are the two singular mechanisms of global control, finally being dragged out into the daylight. Now, as we step back from this highly charged analysis, remember, we aren't here to tell you what to believe. But looking at how an argument like this is constructed is honestly a masterclass in narrative building. We have to ask ourselves, how do these complex histories, completely disparate events, and highly specific data points get woven together to build the narratives that drive our modern political discourse? When we encounter information, how often are we seeing the raw facts versus the carefully constructed architecture of a worldview? It's definitely a question worth keeping in mind next time you're scrolling through your newsfeed. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the narratives around you.